Okay, welcome everyone. We are so glad that you could join us today for another inspiring program in our Health Wellness Club's Healthy Revolution Zoom series. My name's Gretchen Yui. I'm one of the co-leaders of the club alongside my amazing partner, Kay Weiss. And today we're diving into a very important and often overlooked topic, which is mold toxicity and chronic inflammatory response syndrome, called CIRS. And if you've been dealing with unexplained symptoms, and haven't been able to get clear answers, this session might be exactly what you've been looking for. So before we get started, I'm going to hand things over to Kay for some announcements. Kay?
Thank you, Gretchen. Announcements coming up. After tonight, our next 5 meetings are all going to be in person in the villages. And the next one will be September 14th, will be our book club, which will be led by Jeff Mulliken this time. And we are requesting a name change from the villages because we are finding that we're not so much a book club, we're more of a discussion group. And so the name change we have requested is to become the Wellness Roundtable. So you'll hear me referring to it both ways in the future. The next one after that is September 23rd at the Eisenhower Recreation Center, and it will be by a dentist, Johanna Lalalage, and it's a healthier mouth. So she is a dentist, and that should be very good. On September 28th is our next book club slash wellness roundtable. And October 7th, we'll have a tour. It's going to be of the Healing House. And that will be from 10 to 11 on that October 7th. October 12th, we'll have another book club or wellness roundtable. And on October 15th, we will have a tour of the Sozo Wellness Clinic. That's 10 to noon. And a lot of other great meetings coming up. So all of our meetings, of course, the details are on our website and also in the email invitations that you receive. If you aren't receiving them, please visit our website and sign up on our subscriber list. So now back to you, Gretchen, and looking forward to your introducing our main speakers.
Awesome. Thanks, Kay. So just a quick reminder, feel free to drop your questions in the chat throughout this presentation. We'll have a dedicated Q&A session at the end. We'll do our best to get to as many questions as we possibly can. Keep in mind that any questions posed should be in terms of your symptoms and not medical conditions or medical disease names, as what we are discussing does not cure, treat, heal, or prevent any medical disease or medical condition. Now, it is truly my pleasure to introduce two leading experts who will guide us through tonight's program, Heather Sunderland and Bobbi McGrath. These two bring years of experience, degrees, impressive certifications to the table, and they love helping people uncover the root causes of unexplained symptoms, especially when it comes to environmental illness like mold toxicity and CIRS. So tonight they're going to walk us through what mold toxicity is, how to recognize the hidden signs, what kinds of testing and treatment and preventative options are available, but most importantly, how you can start taking control of your health. So let's dive into this. Heather and Bobbi, welcome to our Zoom stage. We're really, really grateful you're here. So I'll let you take it over.
Thank you for that introduction. We really appreciate it. Heather and I very much are happy to be here. We appreciate Gretchen and Kay for you inviting us. We're excited to be able to present to your audience, and we really do hope that there are some big takeaways for people. We would love for you, we're going to tell you all about ourselves and why we are doing what we're doing, but we would love for you to just take a minute to, silence your phone, turn off your TV, that kind of stuff, and just find a piece of paper and maybe even a drink of water and just settle in for some information. All of this information is just something that you can take in and take what you are interested in and leave the rest. And we'll get started with our presentation. First, before we do that, I wanted to show you our contact information. I'm on the right-hand side. My name is Bobbi McGrath, and my counterpart, Heather Sunderland, is on the left. You could take a screenshot of this if you'd like to. In case after this presentation you had extra questions or things like that, you could get a hold of us. We both have private practices in health coaching, and then we banded together last year and decided to get together to work together on mold and CIRS. And so we also have Navigating Mold and CIRS as a business as well. And you can find us on social as well, and come and follow us and check us out. So that's something that we wanted to make sure that you knew how to get a hold of us, because a lot of times people afterwards have other questions. We also wanted to throw out a disclaimer, which is previously mentioned, but this talk is for educational purposes only. It's not information meant to be prescriptive. So hopefully you are not going to be taking copious notes and trying to do all the things that we're explaining and stuff like that. That's why health coaches do their coaching job, and you would probably want to be working with somebody that can help you with any next steps. So I'm going to hand it off to Heather, and she's going to welcome you again, and we're going to give you a little bit of an overview before we get diving into the details.
Well, first, I want to say thank you again to Gretchen and Kay for having us come. We are very excited to be here and bring this information to you and to help you start to recognize whether you may be dealing with mold toxicity or chronic inflammatory response syndrome and some initial steps that you can take. Waiting for the slide to come up. So we have a threefold mission. First, we want to fill that educational gap where people are struggling with chronic illnesses, but often the root is often missed, especially when it comes to the environment like mold toxicity playing a role in the root cause of their illness. We also want to bring awareness to the prevalence of mold toxicity and mold exposure and its impact on our health. And we want to support individuals who are dealing with mold and CIRS to restore their health much more quickly, to reduce their suffering, to reduce ineffective treatments and misdiagnosis. So this is just a little overview where we're going. We already did our welcome. We're going to get into some facts about mold after you learn a little bit about our stories. What is mold toxicity? Symptoms of mold exposure and toxicity. What is chronic inflammatory response syndrome? Some diagnostic tools for identifying both, and the regenerative approach to restoring health. So we want you to be thinking, do you or someone you know struggle with having brain fog or memory issues or feeling overwhelmed? And as you see this, like put a 1 in the chat if someone comes to mind, whether it's yourself or somebody else. It helps us to sort of understand our audience. Do you or someone you know have anxiety, or are you dealing with insomnia? Do you have chronic sinus infections, allergies, or asthma? Do you have digestive issues? That could be constipation, diarrhea, sort of going back and forth, bloating, gas. Or do you have a long list of chronic health conditions and labels? These all can be things that can be attributed to being exposed to water damage or toxins, both.
So some important things you would want to know, some details you should think about, or just kind of listen to some of these facts. It's estimated that about at least 40% of the population suffers from a chronic illness, which technically is something that you've had for at least 3 months. And many of these cases they've found are rooted in the fact that this person was carrying around mold or currently exposed to mold or had a history of mold exposure. The other thing that we want to make sure you understand is people suffering from mold illness are often not diagnosed properly in the conventional medicine system, mainly because the doctors are not trained to teach people or to actually help people with environmental issues. They're just not trained on how to help them improve their health or even to put it on the radar. And they're typically given a medication to treat the symptoms versus detox the body and check their environment. And the last important thing to remember is that without addressing the root cause, and the person's going to remain stuck in a cycle of ineffective treatments that maybe are, like, as I mentioned, treating the symptoms, but they're not really taking away the root cause of why they're actually having the symptoms in the first place. So what percentage of illnesses do you think have an environmental component as a part of the illness? And we wanted you to just take maybe 2 seconds and think about that. As we were doing research for our course that we made, we did find out that over 90% of illnesses have some type of environmental component in them. And a lot of times 50% of those can be attributed to poor indoor air quality, which mold contaminates buildings as being a major contributor, meaning we spend a lot of time indoors. And I know in Florida, you probably spend a lot more time outdoors than most people, but we still have a good portion of our life that we spend indoors. And when that air quality is an issue, it can be a contributing factor. The other thing we want you to understand about mold are some statistics with regard to genetics. 1 in 4 people, so if you have a group of friends, 1 in 4 of you has a very high chance of having a genetic pattern that makes it hard for the body to recognize toxins. And instead of clearing them out of the system, the toxins end up building up and keep the immune system stuck in what we call an alarm mode, or you maybe have heard it as fight or flight. And that pattern is something that once you know potentially that that is your genetic code, you would be able to understand why it would be difficult for you to get the mold out. And you need to do some things different than somebody else that doesn't have necessarily that issue.
So, some facts about mold: 70% of the time you do not see it and you do not smell it. If you smell it and see it, it's not a good sign, but very common not to see it or smell it. 21% of the cases of asthma have been studied to be caused by mold exposure. And I was one of those people. Um, Only 7 states have licensure or certification programs for people who do mold remediation. Did some research before we got on this talk to find out that Florida actually has these laws in place. So that's good news, because where I live, they don't have those laws in place. 1 out of 2 homes in the US is affected by water damage. So that's a pretty big number. And I actually wouldn't be surprised if the number is higher. And 93% of chronic sinus infections have been attributed to mold toxicity. So if you're someone who has chronic sinus infections or you have asthma, that's something to rule out in your environment or in your body. So Melanie was a client of ours. She had been living in toxic mold for 20 years. She didn't know it at the time. She felt like she was dying when she started working with us, and we started her on she had been on protocols by other practitioners to kill parasites and pathogens, but nobody had ever looked at her environment. So working with us, she was identified as having CIRS, started a protocol. The first thing we encouraged her to do was to get out of her environment. Her testing results were very high for the exposure in her home. She got into a camper right away, and literally within 3 days, she was starting to feel much better. Now, Jill's story is a little different. They were exposed to mold at work and in their home, and they spent 7 years jumping from the whole family was sick from practitioner to practitioner. And then they started working with us, and now they're sleeping better. Their brain fog has lifted. They have increased energy. And a lot of people who have mold toxicity, they don't do well in re-exposure. The body sort of alarms, but they are actually able to tolerate some exposure to mold at times, which they were very excited about.
So now it's time to meet us, your 2 coaches, your instructors. We are 2 health coaches on a mission. I am Bobbi McGrath, and I'm on the left-hand side. If you've never seen a personal sauna before, a little bag sauna, that's what I'm in. That's in my basement. It's a little bag, it has a chair inside, it zips up, and you can get really warm in there. You could even tuck your face or head in if you wanted to. And that was one of my healing tools that I used when I was getting the mold out of my system, along with heavy metals and some other things. So I will let Heather tell you what she is doing in her picture.
So I'm in a hyperbaric oxygen tank, which I no longer had Lyme or mold, but it was part of healing my nerves. I had Lyme undiagnosed for 22 years, so I had a lot of issues with nerve pain and nerve healing. And so the hyperbaric oxygen was a cool treatment, but it was very necessary to help my healing of my nerves. So, I'm introducing you, right? I want to introduce you to my friend and my colleague, Bobbi McGrath. We met in health coaching school, and I am forever grateful to her, and you'll hear why, because she suspected I had mold toxicity and CIRS. So if it wasn't for her, I do not think I would be well, because she was the only one who picked up what was going on. But she is an amazing health coach. She has an expertise in trauma and nervous system work, but she also is just wonderful at holding space for people who are struggling and who want to share their story. She's been my cheerleader. We've sort of cheered each other on our healing journey. So it's been a very special relationship and friendship and partnership. So I'm going to let her share a little bit about her story and herself.
Thank you, Heather, for that introduction. I appreciate that. You can read the screen. You can see my education, family history, and that kind of thing. I think what I would say education-wise is I'm really grateful to Heather, because I had not found or known about the regenerative approach until we became friends in health coaching school. I did point out to her when she was really sick and wanting to close down her business that she should probably definitely make sure she did check into mold toxicity and explain what chronic inflammatory response syndrome was to her. And it turned out that's what it was. But she turned back around several months later as we both were on our healing journey and said, I really think you need to check out this regenerative piece. And that was what really helped me move the needle on my health. I had reached a place where I just was improving, but just not the way I wanted to. And that's why I was super excited. And I went back to a new Institute of Regenerative Health school that was created and got my certification and have been working hard on that piece of it. But my why for why I'm doing this is that toxin exposure in our modern world is not something that we can get away from. It's not going to go away. It's probably going to get worse. And I think people really, truly need to wake up and smell the coffee on being aware that their environment does impact their health, especially if they've been carrying around a lot of toxins from childhood or growing up in different places. And we want people to have awareness so that they can have the knowledge to change their course and to educate others, to take care of their family, and to know there's hope that they can actually have an impact on their environment with what's going on with their health, and that mold is probably a big root to a lot of people's health issues. So a little bit about me. My mold story didn't just start in 2018 when I was exposed to a water damaged building, which was my lake house. It had flooded. We had cleaned it up, or the people that remediate cleaned it up. But we didn't realize at the time, because I was a brand new health coach, didn't know much about mold, that we should look out for mold. And turns out it was very moldy down there after it was cleaned up. And both my husband and I went down there. We were both exposed. However, I ended up moving into chronic inflammatory response syndrome, but we both used the regenerative approach to be able to get out of the situation of being super moldy. Some of the symptoms I had, you can read on the screen, but my mold experience, or my mold story, doesn't just start when 2018 when I was exposed. It actually started way back in my childhood when my home basement flooded. I don't know how many times. It wasn't chronic, but it definitely was more than once. My parents did the best they could to clean it up and, threw out the carpet and things like that. But I just know that I was exposed early on in my childhood. And unfortunately, along with that, I also was struggling with, as I got older, I had issues with boundaries and things, and being a people pleaser, and found out later that a lot of that was just the fact that I was growing up in an alcoholic house and wanting to make sure everybody was happy and things like that. And that led me to an adult period in my life where I just really had a lot of nervous system dysregulation. I had a lot of loss. I lost my mom and my brother 10 weeks apart, my dad 3 years later. So I had a lot of stored grief and trauma. And when Heather was saying I have some trauma experience and things like that, it's because of that I became more of a trauma specialist in helping people see how their history of their life really has impacted them. And so when I got to be late 40s and pretty deep into PTSD and some other things that were going on with my health, and then got impacted by the mold, it really took me out. And I just know that I had memory issues. I had connective tissue pain that just would not go away. I was an athlete and I couldn't hardly work out without not struggling with getting off the couch later and things like that. I had muscle soreness and things like that. But once I did identify that I had mold toxicity with the support of some other providers, I went on a rampage to help myself. And I did a lot of intensive neurofeedback, lots of blood work, and I was able to restore my health with the regenerative approach. It did take a while. We're still peeling off layers, Heather and I are, with our health, but I just want people to know that there is success in this approach that we use, which is food as medicine, working on the whole body, not just spot treating, and making sure that the nervous system is a really big piece to the puzzle, and making sure people understand that. And now I want to share a little bit about my friend, Heather Sunderland. She is a type of provider that will give you the shirt off her back. She and I have become very good friends with the fact that we have a business together. We've traveled through mold and CIRS and Lyme and some other things together. And she is one of those caring providers that you just, once you spend time with her and you work with her, or you are supported by her, you just truly feel held by her. She holds space for people that struggle, because we have a heart for the people that are struggling with mold and CIRS. She is a whiz at functional medicine testing, like muscle testing and kinesiology testing. And she's just one of those people that once you hear her story, you're in good hands. She's excellent at figuring out how to help people detoxify and really getting you down to the priorities of what you need in your protocol and helping people truly see that mold and CIRS are something that can be turned around. And I want you to know that she is one of those people that I truly am so grateful for because of the fact that she pointed me in the right direction with the regenerative approach. And I want to let Heather share her story. So I'm going to pass it off to you, Heather.
Thanks, Bobbi. And it's always encouraging to hear Bobbi's stories. Our stories are very different, but we share them so people might recognize themselves in these stories or recognize someone else because people present very differently with mold toxicity and CIRS. Even three people in the same household. I was a dietitian, diabetic educator, became a certified functional health coach, used the regenerative approach. But what I want you to know about me is I was sick 22 years with undiagnosed Lyme and co-infections, and I had an unknown lifetime exposure to mold. So I want to give people hope. If I can get better, so can you. The longer you've been sick, it's a little bit longer process. When people are younger, they bounce back quicker. I wanted to share just so you can recognize how people present so differently. And this is why, too, it's so missed among doctors and they're not trained in this. But my whole family, we were living in a water damaged home that flooded in the basement. My husband, and later we confirmed many years later, mold toxicity and CIRS, had basically metabolic syndrome, could not lose weight. He was about, would run between 280 to 310 pounds, and skin rashes from like head to toe. Today, he's 80 pounds thinner. He hates having his picture taken, but he's down to like 230. It took a while for that weight to come off. My son had asthma, food allergies, and he was diagnosed with blood work that showed Crohn's and severe ulcerative colitis of the entire large intestine, which my son has never done testing for mold toxicity, but the home he grew up in, we had water damage ever since he was 2 years old. And he's been in moldy apartments ever since as a young adult. He was like 16 here. He's 34 now. He has not chosen to address mold toxicity and CIRS. He has gone the conventional route of treating his colitis with drugs. And my story is a little bit different. And like I said, I grew up in a home that I did not know had water damage. My childhood bedroom, my parents told me recently, had Stachybotrys in the wall of my bedroom. So by the time I was 30, I recognized I was having daily chronic pain. I was getting labels like chronic fatigue, fibromyalgia, really tired. And as time went on, the labels just kept increasing. And at 35, I closed my private practice as a dietitian. I was developing severe neuropathy, interstitial cystitis, which is like you're going to the bathroom all the time. You can have bladder cramps, very classic with mold exposure. I became homebound for 10 years in my late 40s, unable to handle the drive of being in a vehicle. And I had a list of like 20 diseases that I was labeled with by the time I was in my 40s, was put on a lot of medications to treat the symptoms, but none of those got to the root. And it wasn't until I was 52 51, 52, that I was diagnosed with chronic Lyme disease. And it was a relief to get a diagnosis. I treated herbally. I did get better, but I was still unwell. I was struggling to walk, to stand, severe ligament laxity. My vertebrae did not stay in place. I was at the chiropractor 3 times a week for 8 years. And we moved across the country from Pennsylvania to Arizona because I had so much trouble walking and doing steps. We wanted to live somewhere where it was more economical to be in a one-story house and we didn't have to deal with winter because I was so fragile. And I entered health coaching school in 2019, and I think I was looking for answers to my own health. At that time, this is how sick I was. I was in a zero gravity chair. I literally was in school tilted back in the chair because if I sat upright in a regular chair, my vertebrae would go out of alignment and I would need to go to the chiropractor. So it was my symptoms were really crazy. And I remember people would look at me and they just didn't understand how I could have such bizarre symptoms. I came to a active adult community like the Villages, a little bit smaller in Arizona. And I had a walker, I had a shower chair. I mean, I was not able to participate in life or activities. It was really frustrating. And during COVID, my Lyme resurfaced. I did not know that could happen. And I actually developed hyperthyroidism or Graves' disease. And I blamed it on the Lyme. And I would be awake for 72 hours at a time. It was a very dark season. And I also had active mono that activated. And that was when Bobbi stepped in and said, Heather, I think you should look into mold toxicity and CIRS. And I did. And she was right. Um, Also had a ton of digestive issues. I was down to about 10 foods. So I started treating with a practitioner who knew mold, Lyme, and SIRS, but I did not see the needle shift in 6 months of treatment. And then I met some people who were using the regenerative approach who had mold and SIRS. And I got started and I started to notice shifts 3 days into the protocol. My diet went from 10 foods to 11, and it just kept expanding. It was a gradual process, but 3 months, my severe brain fog lifted. I stopped needing to go to the chiropractor after 8 years of 3 times a week, which was amazing. 6 months out, I didn't need assistive devices to walk. I was using a walker, a cane. You can see in the picture on the screen, I had a little like seat because I could go on a walk and like walk a few steps and then I'd have to sit, walk a few steps and sit. The picture on the very left, my kneecaps with like the inflammation from the toxicity, my kneecaps weren't staying in place. And it was just crazy. So I had to wear these braces on my kneecaps. At 23 months, I was told I no longer had Lyme, mold, SIRS, SIBO, Graves' disease, like all the labels I had were gone. I wasn't done healing though, right? I had been very, very toxic, exposed a long time to Lyme, to mold and other pathogens that come in with Lyme that weren't in check. And I had been put on about 20 drugs for 20 years. So I had a lot that I had to empty out of my body. At this point, like, neither of us are sick, but we are still peeling away what we think is the very last layer of like the body cleaning up at very much a cellular level. So today I can hike, I can participate in life, I have my own business. So I really want to give people hope that if you've been sick a long time and you want to get well, you can. That's really our heart. So, into talking about mold, which is what you want to hear. So, mold is mighty. There are 100,000 different species of molds. Not all molds are toxic. So, not all molds are dangerous. Molds do serve a good purpose. We're going to talk about that in a minute. There are about 100 species of molds that are toxic. And especially when you're talking an indoor environment, mold indoors in a home, right, where there's no movement of air, that's an issue, right? Toxic mold outside with the sunlight, in the fresh air, not contained, is totally different than toxic mold in a closed space.
So what actually is mold? And I don't know why this is not rendering all the way here. Hold on just a second. There we go. Okay. Mold is a fungus. It breaks down plants and animal matter and man-made materials, which would be things like our home, our drywall, things like that. Then we've got mold that it recycles and decomposes plants and man-made materials. So it serves a purpose in our world. Mold actually has a purpose, but it's definitely not something that humans really should be spending a whole lot of time around or inhaling. Mold grows with moisture and it feeds on the materials where the moisture is. So it doesn't necessarily mean that you have to have a flooded basement for there to be issues. So like a humid environment like Florida is going to be more mold prone. Mold produces spores to be able to reproduce, and that's where the poisonous pieces come from. And then mold is also, hold on, I got to move my picture here. Mold is a living organism. So it is something that has to be taken care of and dealt with. You can't just, spray something on it. It needs to be taken out. It needs to be cleaned up. So what are mycotoxins? We talked a little bit about the fact that Heather mentioned that we can't smell mold and you cannot see mycotoxins. Mycotoxins are something that is invisible and hold on. My advancing is not happening tonight. There we go. It's invisible. It's actually what mold produces is a mycotoxin. And that they are the most poisonous part or the aspect of the mold, and they have no scent. So that is really, really important because we've all been in those damp places, like your grandma's basement, where you're like, wow, it always smells when I go down there. And that's is moisture, and there probably is mold, but mycotoxins, which come out of mold, do not have a smell. So you can actually have things that are infested with mycotoxins and still not smell it. It cannot be killed because mycotoxins are not a living type of product. It has to be cleaned up. It does cross the blood-brain barrier, meaning that it does go into the brain because it is small enough to do that. And mycotoxins are too small for us to see with the naked eye. So you couldn't come into a home that had been remediated and maybe still has mycotoxins and say, oh, I see mold. It's not seeable.
So what is mold toxicity? Basically, mold toxicity is the buildup of these mycotoxins, these mold toxins in your body. Now that can happen from current exposure or ongoing exposure or from previous exposure, like Bobbi and I had exposures, in our childhood. But that's why sometimes when people even get out of mold, they don't feel better because yes, they're not being exposed currently, but the mold and mycotoxins are still in their body, and you have to deal with the mold and the mycotoxins and the negative impact it's had on the body to get well. So the one thing about mold is it really masquerades as so many other labels and illnesses. And my story, I think, shows that very well. It can present and cause so many symptoms, and that underlying root can be missed, and people aren't going to get better unless you figure that out. They're commonly mold toxicity is not trained in conventional medicine doctors. So unless somebody has personally experienced it, going to your regular doctor, they're not usually going to be able to help you diagnose. You really have to go the holistic route. And there's such a wide range of symptoms. Like my husband, son, and I, right? If we all went into a doctor, they would have been focusing on each of our labels, Crohn's, metabolic syndrome, neuropathy. But if we had known earlier on, we could have avoided, right, this long healing journey and the years of being sick. And it's so simple. And we'll talk about that. So simple to be able to test your current environment.
So how do the mycotoxins, which are the poisonous part of the mold, affect the human body? Neurotoxicity, meaning the nerves in your body, they make them toxic, they damage them. That's where the neuropathy and things like that come from. Oxidative stress, which is when the body's under stress. We have it every single day of our life. We have oxidative stress, but mycotoxins increase that stress load a lot. There's just so much more damage in the body. Then you've got your immune toxicity. So it is impacting your immune system and dysregulating it. And typically with CIRS, the immune system constantly is on alarm. So it's constantly firing, thinking that it's, that the sky is falling. Hepatic toxicity is a liver type of toxicity where the liver is getting overwhelmed because it's our biggest filter. And it's the thing that's helping us try to filter out all of the mycotoxins along with some of the other organs. It is carcinogenic. Mold can be. You don't always get cancer just because you got mold exposure, but people that are in long-term exposure or people not addressing it and not detoxifying it over time can end up with different types of cancer. Nephrotoxicity it definitely is a kidney type of thing. That's what nephro means. So it's also impacting your kidneys and your bladder. Your gut, your gastrointestinal tract is also impacted. So people that are struggling with, like Heather's family, like a lot of GI issues, Crohn's, constipation, diarrhea, all that kind of stuff, digestion, reflux, things like that, people wouldn't expect that it could be tied to mold. And the reproductive toxins, it can impact your reproductive processes in a female and a male. So if somebody's trying to get pregnant, that could be something where their toxins are just too high.
So mold symptoms, there's a long list here, and this isn't even the full list. And everybody's sort of different how it hits their body. Insomnia is a real classic one when people cannot sleep in a home or in a bedroom. Cognitive difficulties with toxicity and mold. Pain, because these are toxins, they're inflammatory. So people can have fibromyalgia kind of pain that moves around. It can be from mold, mycotoxins, or just general toxicity. Unexplained weight loss or weight gain, numbness and tingling. I had tons of neuropathy. Part of it was Lyme, part of it was mold. The sinus and lung issues we mentioned, like asthma, allergies, like if you have chronic bronchitis, ruling out mold when you have lung issues and sinus issues is really wise. Some people will get vertigo, dizziness. We talked about digestive issues, severe fatigue, even after a good night's sleep. Some people get changes in mood or they're angry. They're angry because their liver's impacted by the mold. I see that a lot with couples where the husbands will be angry. In children, you can have bedwetting if there's exposure to mold. That's not always the reason. And then Bobbi hit on these hormonal imbalances. I mean, my hormones were non-existent when I tested them a few years ago. My hormones are coming back online at 60. I had no idea that was possible. So there's always hope. So there are many conditions that mold is usually a part of. So if somebody has Lyme disease, they should always be ruling out mold in their body and their environment. Same with fibromyalgia, chronic fatigue. I don't know if you've heard of PANS or PANDAS. but it's a pediatric condition that causes psych kind of symptoms. POTS, postural orthostatic tachycardia syndrome, where blood pressure will drop really quickly, they'll get faint, they'll pass out, miserable thing to be dealing with. Mast cell activation syndrome, histamine issues, multiple chemical sensitivity. Those are usually signs people are toxic. And every client I've seen with these labels, they were all living in an active water damage building. So be thinking about, do you know anybody who's struggling with any of these kind of symptoms? I mean, if you can do what Bobbi did, not everybody's going to be receptive and want to go down the rabbit hole of testing their home, testing their body, because it is a rabbit hole to go down. But does anybody come to mind that is dealing with some of this? It can be very helpful when you can recognize it.
So now we want to explain really quick what CIRS is. CIRS stands for chronic inflammatory response syndrome, which we've talked about, which is a complex and chronic biotoxin illness type of situation. There's no specific test like a CIRS test, but there's blood tests that can confirm that you have a lot of the symptoms of CIRS. And a biotoxin is toxins that come from living organisms like mold, viruses, bacteria, and parasites, which a lot of people don't like to think that we have parasites in our body. But if you're living with a pulse, you have parasites. It's a part of our microbiome kingdom. Typically, what CIRS is, they're typically going to be people that are much more sick than a person just that had mold toxicity. That's just telling us we have 10 more minutes, Heather. The alarm I just had. When the toxin bucket is overflowing, it leads to systemic impairment and immune system dysfunction, and the body inflames because of the fact that it is not able to clear the toxins out. So that's where the inflammation comes from. And that's where when somebody comes in and says to us, I've got this, and this, and all of them are inflammatory conditions, immediately we're thinking, you got to check your environment. But it can be verified through blood work with that. But we want to make sure you understand, don't walk away from this thinking CIRS is only because you got exposed to mold, but it often is. So some symptoms, we've gone through quite a bit. This is all kind of a lot of them. It's not the full list, believe me. But this is just a compilation of symptoms. And we want you to understand many of these symptoms can overlap with mold toxicity. So finding out you have mold toxicity is the first step. And then depending on assessing it more, that's when you kind of can figure out with a practitioner's help and support that you have chronic inflammatory response, which is a condition that's brought on by being overtoxic. So something to understand too is there are 11 systems in the body, and mold and CIRS in particular basically impacts all 11 systems of the body, and they're not all going to scream at the same time or at the same level. Some people have issues with their gut more than they would have with their brain. Other people have issues with their skin more than they have with their, lungs. It just depends. And a lot of that is your genetic makeup, but it's also just where you're, how long you've been exposed and things like that. And for instance, like with me, mine was a lot of nerve damage, a lot of nervous system control. So we want you to understand that it does show up and cover a lot of ground when it's in the body. So some things that happen when you have mold toxicity, you've got systemic inflammation or neurological inflammation. You've got gut dysbiosis, like we mentioned. We talked a little bit about the fact that you're a higher risk for cancer. Hormonal imbalance, when the gut is disrupted, you're going to have a hard time making hormones because that's where most of your hormones are made, or in their gut. So if the gut is inflamed, it can't make the hormones, and therefore you get the hormonal imbalances. Metabolic issues where you're not able to lose weight, or in my instance, I was incredibly thin. I lost a lot of weight. People were like, what are you doing? And I was like, I'm not trying to do this. This is just part of what's going on with me. Neural inflammation, meaning all over the body, like fibromyalgia, rheumatoid arthritis, things like that. And Heather's got some information a little bit about these last four that she can share with you.
Yeah, thyroid issues are really common, whether it's hyperthyroid or Hashimoto's hypothyroid, very common with toxicity and mold exposure and CIRS. Every client that we ever work with who has mold and CIRS, they always have elevated levels of these parasites, viruses, bacteria, because once you've been toxic, that just makes the environment in your body a better place for these bugs that we don't want there to thrive. Mitochondrial damage is the powerhouse of our cell. That's what helps us make ATP and gives us energy. And so most people who have mold and CIRS have some energy issues. So we have to heal the mitochondria of the cells. And then anybody who's exposed to mold or has SIRS, there is this increased risk of having multiple autoimmune diseases or autoimmune diseases activating. So Epstein-Barr virus, right, the monovirus that activated in me, it wasn't because of the Lyme, it was because of SIRS. It was because I was toxic and inflamed. So once we bring down those loads, people's immune system starts to work better. So this chronic symptom, the symptom cluster test is something that a practitioner will use as a potential first step to assess if you might have chronic inflammatory response syndrome. So basically, those symptoms that we showed you, they're just broken up into blocks of categories. And so if you've got 8 symptoms from 3 different blocks, that's enough with this next test for a physician or naturopath to diagnose you with SIRS. This visual contrast sensitivity test, when we get to the Q&A, I will pop a link. So if anybody wants to take it, it's a $15 test you do on your computer. So very inexpensive to do, and you need to do it on a laptop. The optic nerve of the eye gets inflamed when it's exposed to mycotoxins. And so it impairs not your ability to see shades of gray. So you may not see a change in your eyesight driving on the road, but when you take this test, you're looking at these lines on the screen that are tilted left or right. And my husband and I took it and failed it. So it's a very simple way to track somebody's progress in the healing journey or potential even re-exposure. Sometimes people don't have a failed BCS test, but the clients I've worked with and Bobbi, all of them have had failed this visual contrast sensitivity test. So I'll put that link in there if anybody wants to take that test themselves. When to test your environment. Number one, if you know you have a history of water damage in your home, I would encourage you to test the environment because so many times things are not dealt with properly. If you're not improving on a treatment plan that you are doing with a practitioner, whatever you're treating for, and you're not feeling better, rule out that your home environment, your work environment is not the cause of that. Because if you're being exposed to toxins at home, it's going to hinder getting better. And then if you have symptoms like mold and SIRS symptoms, you definitely want to rule out your environment because if you start to treat, you're not going to get better if you're living in a toxic environment. And you're going to spend a lot more trying to get better if the issue is what's coming into your body and your home. If you have Lyme disease or those lists that I gave you before, fibromyalgia, Lyme, PANS, mast cell activation, all of those things we listed, test your environment, test your body to see if you're dealing with mold toxicity. And so this is a simple test that you can do at home. It will not tell you where the mold is, but it stands for Environmental Relative Moldiness Index, ERMI. It's a do-it-yourself. They send you a dust cloth. You're basically paying for the lab to read it. You're taking a sample of dust throughout your house, getting the cloth really, really dirty. And it tests for 36 different molds, 29 of which are toxic and 7 of which are outdoor molds. So it's just going to say, oh, there's a problem. You know, there's a problem. It's not going to tell you where, but it's going to help you to know there's a problem. So in summary, mold toxicity in SIRS impacts multiple systems of the body. It has such a wide range of symptoms, and it may not be linked to a single cause. So we're winding down just a few more slides. So there are ineffective approaches to treating mold. A lot of times the preparation piece is missed. People want to go into detox before preparing the body for detoxification and preparing their detox pathways. Many things don't look at the entire bucket in the body, the whole pathogen load and other toxins, because mold usually tips the bucket, but we also have chemicals and pesticides and heavy metals and other things. We want to bring down those toxins in the body. We're going to bring down systemic inflammation. And then inappropriate testing of the environment. There's so many different options to test the environment. There's no one perfect test, but a lot of practitioners will recommend a test and say, oh, your environment's safe. You know, and we know looking at them, they didn't do the right test or they didn't do enough testing because there's different aspects of water damage that affect the environment, not just mold and mycotoxins. There can be bacteria, endotoxins.
Yep. Some other ineffective approaches are when people are trying to detox and they're not restoring their gut lining because the mold actually takes out your good bacteria, especially specific ones. So that's something that needs to be restored. And then cellular nourishment. That's one of the things that was a game changer for both Heather and I is that we took in superfoods and different products that are whole foods and nourished our body because your body really isn't able to absorb specific nutrients. And then not addressing the nervous system. I don't think I've I think I've banged on that a lot this time, that people need to address their nervous system because it is the thing that could hold them back from improving. These approaches keep individuals on a roller coaster when you're not addressing these specific things that we're talking about in the regenerative approach, and you're not able to restore the body fully when you don't address the whole body. So really quick, really quick, the regenerative approach is the practice of revitalizing the body's cellular function, clearing the interferences and toxins, and enhancing your detoxification pathways. Because if you've got a sluggish liver, you've got kidneys that are filled with mucus from eating a standard American diet and things like that, you're going to struggle to get the toxins out. This approach creates an internal environment which can holistically restore the body's health so the body can do what God designed it to do. So we're not rocket scientists. We just know that there's a certain way to go and an order of operations when you're working with the regenerative approach. So this is what we want to go run through really quick. Got a couple more slides, and then we'll take your questions and answers.
So the first step in healing is always removing yourself from the toxic environment. For some people, that doesn't happen right away because you have decisions to make, but most people can't get well if they're being exposed to moderate or high levels of mold or mycotoxins in their home. The next step is we've got to prepare the body. We have to open up those detox drainage pathways, kidneys, lymph, bowels, liver. There are other pathways, but those are the four biggies. If you're not pooping, then the toxins aren't going to be leaving the body and they're going to be coming out another way, like through your skin, and you're going to be upset with us and you're going to have more rashes and more issues. So it's a really important piece. The other piece that's really unique to what we do is the nourishing piece and increasing alkaline foods, which are your fruits and vegetables, which for me, I think I was so malnourished because of how long I was sick. So that was a huge piece.
Oops, sorry guys.
And then just gently detoxing the body. And I did a lot with just food in the beginning of my journey.
And then, as I mentioned, restoring the gut. So that's key. Things that you're going to eat, things you're not going to eat, things that you're going to be doing and taking that are going to be helping restore the gut lining, addressing the nervous system. Stress is a huge piece to a person restoring their nervous system, but also in restoring their gut lining, and then decreasing the toxins and the pathogenic burden on the body, because it's not just the mold that is keeping you sick or moving you into the chronic inflammatory response syndrome. It's actually your body's full toxin bucket. So that includes old viruses that you may have picked up. It could be vaccine residue. It could be pharmacological agents that you've taken for a very long time that are clogging up your liver. It could be, parasites from eating specific way and diets and things that you've been reacting to, or even having lots of pets could be also an issue with having too high of a parasite load. So the reality is there's more to healing than just killing and binding. So we want you to understand that you can find people to help you, kill mold. You can find products to help you kill mold in your body, but it's not just about that. Most people with mold and CIRS are basically very overwhelmed. They're reactive and exhausted, and it's not because they're doing it wrong. It's because their bodies are overloaded and their body is confused. And typically their providers are not understanding what's going on with them and kind of throwing spaghetti at the wall and spot treating. We want you to understand and walk away that healing is possible when you support your body gently, strategically, which is really the key, and in the right order. There is an order of operations for this. The results from not using the regenerative approach, in our opinion, is that people typically stay sick. Their drainage pathways aren't open. They feel miserable because they're trying to do things and they're just not able to get, I call it the junk out of the trunk, out of the back door. And they're not assessed properly by a provider who's not trained in this area. The cellular nourishment is not properly addressed, and the gut stays compromised, and toxins and pathogens in the body, besides mold, continue to thrive. They all kind of have their own piece to the pie, and when those are too high, the person really struggles to get to a place where they feel much better. So this is our last slide before we take Q&A. We wanted to give you one more opportunity just to be able to connect with us with our website, our email, our social media. As it says here, Heather's in Buckeye, Arizona, and I'm in Wheaton, Illinois, outside of Chicago. We are so thankful that we got time to spend with you tonight and answer questions coming up here. And thank you for your time and patience for listening to our presentation.
Favorite part is answering questions. So I hope
Well,
you
Heather
guys
and
have
Bobbi, this was terrific. I'm really, really glad you came on and spoke to our group. And we have one question, and I have a question. I'm hoping others will add their questions to the chat. We'll start out with something from Kay, and she is asking, which home building materials, brick, drywall, carpet, etc., are most attractive to growing mold, and what are the best building materials?
I don't know if I should answer that. We should answer that one just because I feel like it's out of our league as a coach. All building materials can have water damage. I mean, I've had clients in Pakistan and dry climates who had cement buildings that had mold. So wood, right? Wood definitely a lot of times is my house in Arizona, new build, had building material mold, had Stachybotrys, and Aspergillus niger. Because a lot of times when we build a home, the wood's already contaminated or moldy, or the house is framed and rain comes in. And so I was in Dallas and I was like, it was pouring and there were all these beautiful homes that were framed and 24 hours of rain and high humidity. And I thought, oh my gosh, the poor people who move into these homes. So, I mean, I didn't have eyes to see it before I had mold toxicity, but I'm not the expert. Maybe Bobbi, you have something to say about specific materials, but I know there are homes that are built like that are supposed to be mold free, like Boxable, like I don't know if you've heard of Boxable in Nevada,
I think what I would
but
say
they're,
is it's
go
just
ahead.
the mold. So something gets wet, whether it's carpet, whether it's a basement concrete floor, whether it's wood. If they're porous materials and they hold on to that water, right, they're going to fester mold. Mold's going to grow within 24 hours of something being wet if it's not cleaned up or dried out. And so don't be fooled by the fact that, somebody's like, oh, I cleaned up my basement myself. You really do need, when you have a severe leak, not just a little bit of water under the sink, but when you have a severe leak, you need professional help, people to come in, people to inspect it, um, not somebody to go pour a bunch of bleach on it and scrub it down. There's some really big do's and don'ts. But I will tell you, my home is a log cabin. It's wood. Everything in that place is porous. So everything had to be wiped down and cleaned up and inspected and things like that. And so it's really not, once you know that your home has mold, you really do have to take the right steps. And I agree with Heather. I was up on a run a couple years ago and they were building a house and there was wood sitting outside, covered with a little bit of a tarp, but it was wet. And I actually lifted up the tarp and you could see some very soggy, wet wood. And I too thought, gosh, I would hate to have that stuff installed into my building or to my home, because there's just no way to get it dry enough to get it so that it's safe once you cover it up with drywall.
Wow, I never thought about that before. That's pretty scary
Yeah.
stuff.
Yeah.
So you showed a pool when you defined microtoxins. Are pools common places for mold toxicity?
So normally, if we weren't on fast speed with this, because we typically do this presentation in an hour, so the extra, 15 minutes gives us time to explain things. The pool was a visual to show you that a mycotoxin is literally like a teeny tiny drop in a pool. Like it is so, so tiny. And so the visual of that is just that mycotoxins are a poison and they don't have to be really big to impact the body greatly.
Okay. And
Yeah,
what are your thoughts about eating moldy cheeses or mushrooms?
so there's a lot of um, different opinions. There are foods that are high in potentially contaminated with mycotoxins, dairy, coffee, nuts, grains that sit in a storage silo. So if somebody's already sick with mold toxicity, SIRS, or chronic health issues, they may be much more sensitive. So when I was healing in the beginning, right, I avoided all those things. Everybody's sort of different, right? But mushrooms are not mold like in a house. So I think there's a lot of back and forth on mushrooms. I had no problem doing mushrooms. Dairy in general, not just moldy cheese, but dairy in general is highly inflammatory. And especially if you're already dealing with chronic inflammatory response syndrome or mold toxicity. Um, we both don't recommend dairy if people are trying to heal,
Yeah.
because it's going to make you more inflamed. It's going to clog up your lymphatic system. Um,
Yeah.
but people have to make their own choices, right? We'll make recommendations. But that's a great question. So I don't have a concern with people doing mushrooms at all.
Well, and there's a
But
lot of
people
to mushrooms,
medicinally,
yeah, medicinally, there's mushroom coffees, there's all these mushroom this, mushroom that. I think, like Heather, you hit it the nail on the head, is if you're in a very inflamed, chronically inflamed state, you really want to not stoke the fire by putting things into your system that potentially could be adding to the fire. So I actually went grain free before I ever knew that I had mold toxicity because I had been having plantar fasciitis in my feet for years. Turns out that it was potentially, you can't exactly tie it directly to that, but that it was probably from a tick bite and Bartonella, which is a co-infection and of Lyme, and that it was causing so much inflammation in my body. It was probably one of the reasons why when I got mold exposed, I was ripe to be taken out. So what Heather and I try to explain to people is we give people the biggest um, fires, right? Like, let's get rid of the coffee or at least buy coffee that's been certified as mold free. And people are like, oh, I didn't know that was a thing. And it is. You know, there's companies that you pay more for it, but companies test the coffee beans to make sure they're not moldy. Because what happens, the grains sit in a silo, the coffee beans sit places. When things sit places and they get warm and they get cold, or they're transported improperly, or they're not handled well, they can actually have mold growing in them. I've eaten a kind bar before with nuts in it and know that that there's these nuts are not good. There is definitely something in here that's happened to the nuts that they've broken down or had something with it. So some of it is just education and trial and error, taking things out. A lot of times people are married to a lot of the things that they love, and it's really hard to peel back some of that. And it's a process, and you go slow and you remove things for a while. And sometimes you give them up forever, and other times you try a little bit after you've started to feel better and see what happens.
Okay. Next question is, do HEPA filters, air filters, running near a humid shower room help mold?
The size of the mycotoxin is too small for a HEPA air filter to actually grab on and hold on to it. So I
Oh,
would
yeah, the
say,
difference between mold and mycotoxin, right? The HEPA filter may help the mold, but the mycotoxin is really what makes us sick. People, and we use the terms often interchangeably, but with mold and water damage comes mycotoxins and other toxins. But the mycotoxin is the size of the COVID virus. So it's like it's really small. So filters don't filter mycotoxins. Um, but it may bring down if there's mold spores in the air, right? It may bring down the mold spores, but it won't bring down usually the mycotoxin load in the air.
Okay.
Like for some people, that can be supportive.
hmm I mean, I have air filters, believe me, I've got them in certain places.
Okay. Next point is, I don't understand the correlation between Lyme's disease and mold. Can you?
Yes. Yeah. So, number one, mold toxicity suppresses the immune system. I mean, anytime we're toxic, the immune system's suppressed. So, anything you're dealing with, like a chronic infection like Lyme, you don't get better if you're living in mold. I have so many people being treated for Lyme and they're not getting better and they're on like 70 pills from their doctor. And I know right away, they're not getting better because they're in mold because not, your immune system's too suppressed. And also the mold toxicity mimics Lyme. So it's hard to know what's what. And most people who have chronic Lyme, they really have mold toxicity. And once you address the toxicity in the body, my Lyme just went away. I mean, did I treat Lyme in the beginning before I knew I had the mold piece? Yes, the Lyme came back because I was toxic and inflamed and my immune system was suppressed. But as that toxic load comes down in the body, the immune system is going to work properly and work better and more efficiently to do its job. So anybody who has chronic Lyme, long-term Lyme, there are studies that say chronic Lyme is really mold toxicity. It's just the immune system's not working right to put down the Lyme bacteria.
Okay. One of the symptoms of SIRS on your slide was electric shocks. That's fascinating. Please explain.
Well, I don't know, Bobbi, you want me to explain or you want to explain? I had that symptom. I moved to the desert and every time I'd hit the light switch or I'd even come near the light would turn on without me even always turning it on. And I just thought I'm in a dry climate, I'm in the low desert. And it was the fact that I had chronic inflammatory response syndrome. That was one of my symptoms that I knew I was getting better when I touched electrical things. I didn't get a shock. But can you explain it, Bobbi?
So when our body runs on water and glucose and electrolytes and energy and things like that. And when we are carrying around extra load, let's say, of parasites that carry heavy metals and things like that, we just have a metabolic imbalance in our body, positive charges and negative charges. And it's like a whole nother webinar we could get into, but it's just when the body's got that electrical charge or lack thereof, depending on what's going on, you're going to have the static shocks. And that is just a sign that your body's just off balance with the electrolytes. And there's probably a high heavy metal load in the system and an immune response going on.
Wow, that's fascinating. Okay, does sunshine or artificial UV light, especially red light, play a role in detoxing?
Yeah, right.
So
I mean, being out in the fresh air, sunshine is so good for, oh my gosh, so many reasons for our nervous system, um, for helping the body discharge electrically. Um, Everybody's different. Those tools that we use, right, to support our body and detox. I have not done red light. I've done a lot of interesting things. But everybody leans toward, I think, what their body needs and wants. So those can be helpful things in the process of detoxing and just keeping the body functioning more properly.
Yep. I've actually been utilizing a red light therapy. I have a little mat that I wrap around. I broke my leg in skiing really bad this March 1st and been using that. But it's also really active to bump up your mitochondria because SIRS and mold toxicity are like not autoimmune, but they're mitochondrial illnesses. Basically, your mitochondria is as Heather mentioned, your powerhouse. It's where we build our ATP. It's where the energy is produced. It's where the gas is made for our bodies to run on. And what happens is when there's oxidative stress is going on, which is the stress from life, the stress from viruses, bacteria, parasites, mold, fungus, all the different things that are going on, and then stress just from living in our modern world and our lifestyles and things like that. What happens when mold comes in or we go into chronic inflammatory response, our oxidative stress goes to the next level. It's just so much higher. So working with decreasing your oxidative stress load with your lifestyle choices, morning sun especially is excellent for your body because the rays from the morning sun, the early light that's in the frequency in the morning early sun goes into your retina and back into your nervous system and your brain, and it's producing more melatonin. And melatonin is an antioxidant. It's not just what people think for sleep. It's an antioxidant in the body and it breaks down into so many other things. So when you go out in the morning sun and you just get a few minutes on your eyes, you're actually feeding your body. And you had mentioned red light. It's a mitochondrial booster. That's what they found is that it just boosts up your mitochondria efficiency. I don't know if it necessarily makes more mitochondria, but it can enhance the production of what the mitochondria are doing.
Great. Here's kind of another related detox question. So what in your opinions, are the best ways to detox other than the red light? Even if you don't think you have a mold issue. And I'm particularly interested because Bobbi, you had a picture of this sauna bag, which was something like months ago I thought I was going to buy, but I never did. And so now I'm really intrigued because I see you in a sauna bag. So can you talk to that plus other modes of detoxing that you guys recommend?
Well, there's free stuff, right? There's like, I think that we've done research, there's like 80% of the people are chronically dehydrated. And you don't even have to be like heavily dehydrated. You can just have a 1% drop in your hydration level in your body, and you actually can have a 10% decrease in your cognitive abilities and your decision making, even your energy level, things like that. So the number one thing I would say personally is that you make sure that you, especially where you all, if you're in Florida, are living with the humidity and the heat, is hydrate your body and not just hydrate with just water, but making sure you're getting electrolytes with it. Which could be just a special electrolyte that you like that you're going to use, a tablet, or you can crack some Celtic sea salt or Baja Gold sea salt into it, and making sure, or you can squeeze a lemon or an orange in there and get some electrolytes. Getting water and electrolytes into your body is going to be the one thing that your body cannot. It's like rowing a boat in a stream with a bunch of rocks. You're going to go a lot faster when there's water in the stream. So if there's no water, you're not going to be able to detoxify your body because it can't get it out. It can't go to the bathroom and it can't make urine if you're somewhat dehydrated, because your body's going to be in survival mode and it's only going to be doing the things that it absolutely has to do, which typically isn't going to be detox.
I love
So
Bobbi's pics. I love your pictures. I love her
I would
pictures.
say that I do use my sauna. You have to be careful with it. You can't just go, crazy with it because you can, like I said, dehydrate yourself and things like that. So, but it is a beneficial tool to push that detox when you're detoxifying, when you actually have your pathways open, which is one of the things that Heather and I are so passionate about, is helping people get their pathways open, which
Right.
is a whole nother webinar.
Yeah, it is a whole other webinar, but I'll tell you, like the lymph, right, is the sewage system of the body. So if you're sick and sedentary, the lymph doesn't have a pump on it, right? The heart does, the circulatory system does, but the lymph doesn't. And the lymph flows throughout the body. So any kind of movement, right? Even me sitting in a chair, you've got lymph nodes under your arm, you've got them throughout your body. So like I've been doing a vibration plate, but just getting out and moving or stretching gets the lymph moving. And the more sedentary we are, and I know on the healing journey, it was for me, it was a rough journey because I was sick for so long. So I was more sedentary as I was healing. And so I had to make that conscious effort to do things that got the lymph moving, to go for a walk or to get on a vibration plate or to dry brush. So there's simple things you can do, but a lot of these home tools, if you're toxic and you're sick, not if you're like Gretchen, if you're just wanting to do some things to increase, detox, like increasing fruit in your diet and vegetables are going to increase detoxification in the body, and picking what resonates with you. But if you're chronically ill, you're going to need more than just the home tools of Epsom salt baths or sauna or dry brushing. If you're really sick with mold or SIRS, that's going to take somebody really supporting you herbally with your pathways and assessing what you need and what's appropriate for you based on your sensitivities, if that makes sense. But just eating whole food, decreasing what's coming in toxically, looking at your water. That's something that I'm getting more and more educated about and thinking about shifting what I'm doing with my water. I have a reverse osmosis filter and I've worked so hard to get well. I'm thinking about distilled water because there's all the toxins are taken out of the distilled water instead of 50% out of, a filtration system. Because I don't want to be sick again. And I worked way too hard to get well, but it's such a personal choice. Those things. If you're leaning in and resonating towards something, go with what you're resonating with. I did Epsom salt baths, literally would buy from Walmart and get like 100 pounds of Epsom salts delivered on a regular basis. And I just gradually increased the amount of saunas didn't work for me at all. I did not feel better ever doing a sauna.
You have to be sweating. You have to be sweating. And when you have a problem sweating, like when your mitochondria and your skin is um, damaged or low or not working well, it's hard to sweat. And so if you're not sweating and you get in a sauna, it's kind of like, pressing the gas, but you're in neutral, if that makes sense.
Mhm.
So sauna that's why I was saying you have to be careful. The other piece that Heather and I, when we were doing a research for a course that we have, the breath is 70% of our detox, our breath. And that's mainly because we take so many breaths. What was it? 22,000 gallons or whatever. It was crazy numbers that we were like, oh my goodness, when we looked up some things. So the one free thing you can do is get outside and go and breathe. Do a 4-4-4, which is breathe in for 4, hold for 4, exhale 4, hold for 4. It's called box breathing. It's free. You can do it every day. You can do it while you're sitting outside for the first few minutes in the morning. You can do it before you get out of bed, or before you go to sleep. And really, I always tell people, especially if you really want to get some junk out of the trunk, get down into the lower lobes of your lungs. So when you're exhaling, do that extra like huff kind of puff at the end of it, like really clear it out. See if you can get to the lower lungs and get out the junk that we don't really, because we tend to use just about a third of our lungs, the top third. So really deep breathing, getting your belly to inflate versus your shoulders going up, and trying to visualize like a ball when you're inhaling, that the ball is expanding down in your lower abdomen and pressing out like through your spine, out your back. Because a lot of times people have a problem thinking about breathing. They're trying to breathe really deep, really deep. And it's like, just try to expand, make your lower abdomen, your diaphragm go down and open all of that up, because that is not only is going to regulate your nervous system, but it's also going to help get the lymph flowing. It's going to help the lungs exhale, and it's going to get the circulation moving. So it's kind of like a triple whammy.
Simple, but yeah, very profound.
Yep.
Oh, those are all great tips and ideas. Thank you. Okay. Can high triglycerides but good cholesterol levels otherwise indicate SIRS? You ever heard
I
of
mean,
that?
people with SIRS can have high triglycerides and have okay cholesterol. Often there's many more symptoms. Like the people with SIRS tend to have multiple labels. Like, if someone comes to me and they have rheumatoid arthritis and they have lupus and, they have this list, right, of ailments, we know people like that. And that was me. You want to be thinking toxicity and SIRS. If that's your only symptom, um, my first thought would not be to SIRS, but you can always, right, test your environment, test your body to see if there's mold in your body, and mold or mycotoxins in your environment.
Okay, interesting.
And I want to touch on something really quick with this cholesterol. When you see high cholesterol going up and continuing to go up, my cholesterol started going up in my late 20s. I remember I got my first cholesterol test back and it wasn't great, but it wasn't terrible. And then it just continued to go up. And I didn't realize until I was in health coaching school, in the regenerative health coaching school, that that is a sign that your body is under extreme inflammation. Because when your cholesterol goes up and your liver's overproducing the cholesterol, it's actually trying to repair because cholesterol is used in the body as repairing. It's the spackle that goes on the inside of the vessels to clear up the cracks in the vessels and the damage that's been done by either a high sugar, high carbohydrate diet or toxins or other things. So you can have high cholesterol and people love going on statins and getting their numbers down, but they're still not getting to the root of why they have high cholesterol in the first place, which can be mold toxicity.
I'm glad you mentioned that. Um,
Yeah, thank you.
Here's one. Does hydrogen peroxide get rid of mold?
Well, the bottom line with mold, I would not use hydrogen peroxide on anything porous because things that are porous, right? You're adding liquid into something porous, which can add to mold growth. But number two, porous items can have mold throughout. Like if it's a plate that has mold on it, you could clean it off with hydrogen peroxide and right, kill the mold. Um, but if you've got mold in your home or on wood, it has to be removed, right? You don't just go in and kill it. Mold reacts when you try to kill it. Like people killing it with bleach or killing it with something, it gets defensive and it'll produce and put out more mold and throw out more spores and mycotoxins in the air. So again, it's not just about getting rid of the mold. We got to clean up the mycotoxins that are in the air that we can't see or smell. So if there's mold in a home, it's got to be properly remediated with somebody who that's what they do. It has to be, you have to have an inspector and then you want somebody separate to remediate the environment properly, which involves small particle cleaning. It's right. It's a big deal. It's
Extensive.
it doesn't work just spraying something on it. People are painting kilns over it. People get really, really sick in those environments. I've had people who it's just really sad what's allowed. I don't know why there's not a law about apartments and right places, like even testing a home before you buy, like we have radon testing now before you buy a home. It would be such an amazing thing to have the requirement for mold testing, but
Yeah, really good point. Okay, here's another one. Are symptoms of mold toxicity manifested incrementally, or is there a tipping point before which they are not evident and after which they appear?
um, Bobbi, can I start?
Yes,
Or do you want
please.
to?
I mean,
Yeah, I mean,
here's what I'll tell you. Mine were building for many years until it
yeah.
just the ship tipped over and it was like, okay, no more.
And I think if we had known, right, like asthma, I had asthma as a 3-year-old. Totally, I don't have asthma anymore. I had asthma 54 years. Once I started detoxing 3 months out, my asthma was gone. There was too much in my story to share. So, yeah, I think it does build because people don't know and they don't know their genetics and their past exposure to other toxins. And then those of us who have the poor genetics to detox mold, Lyme, and other genetic SNPs, those are the people who get sicker. I mean, I was the one totally disabled in my family. My husband and son are still, were functional and working, even though they had SIRS and mold toxicity. So I do think there's a point where people just like don't come back, and then you've got that cytokine storm
Okay.
like you
I'm going to
have
take one more
from COVID.
question, which is what, in your opinion, is the very best method to use to test the home for mold? And I know you talked about those two tests, and I would welcome you to email those to me later. So maybe I could include those in a follow-up email to all of our members. But what would be the best tests for home
The,
mold?
I would say the ERMI and the EMMA is the best starting place if you don't have signs, you don't have visible water damage. If you already have had visible water damage or you know you had a water leak, I would get an inspector to come in and make sure they're knowledgeable about mold, toxicity, CIRS. Make sure there's a whole list of guidelines. ChangeTheAirFoundation.org is a great, I'll send you that in email, Gretchen, too, for like, hey, these are next steps. They do a lot of education to educate people about mold and next steps and what to look for in an inspector versus a remediator. Because I'm knowledgeable, but right, I'm not an inspector, I'm not a remediator. But if you already have water damage and you have a history, I would just spend the money on getting somebody to come in. But know that air testing is like Bobbi's home air testing showed mold, but it's very unusual. The mold levels have to be really high because mold tends to be heavy. So if they're doing an air test in the room I'm in right now and they do it in the middle of the room and the mold's in the wall, you're not going to have a positive air test unless you're doing a sample in the cavity in the wall. So that's where the dust cloth testing, the ERMI, or the EMMA, which is mold and a mycotoxin test. That's a do-it-yourself test, is a great place to start to see if there is a problem that you're not aware of, but that doesn't account for like past exposures in your life. And that's where um, you can also test the body. And there's pros and cons to every test out there in the body and the home. There's no perfect one test. So it can get sort of costly going down that rabbit hole.
Yep. Yep. And there's going to be people that are going to want to take your money and do lots of testing or tell you certain things. And you just really have to be buyer beware, do your due diligence, ask the right questions. If you're feeling a gut sensation, like this person's maybe doesn't know exactly what they're talking about, ask around. And testing for mycotoxins is different really than mold testing. Mycotoxins are in the air, so it's a different type of test. And so after remediation is done, or someone says, whoa, we did have mold, we remediated, and you're purchasing the home or something, that might be something you would want to do is, are there mycotoxins still left in the home that we would need to deal with?
Good points. We're going to wrap up this Q&A. Thank you so much. This was incredibly informative and just you guys did an excellent job. Thank you so much for speaking to us. I do have a question here. Someone asking, where can you find the replay of this presentation? It will be emailed to our email database. So anyone that's on our list as a member of the club will get it. And we could also post it to our Facebook group. It'll be on our website. So it will be out there for people to share with others. And we hope you will. This was just packed with so much good information. So I want to just thank everyone for attending and for the area leaders for getting others involved in this portion of our Health Wellness Club and the Zoom presentations. We hope to see you guys at the upcoming Wellness Roundtable on September 14th and the in-person oral health presentation from the dentist on September 23rd. And until then, everybody stay well. Again, thank you, Heather and Bobbi. Wonderful job. Have a wonderful evening, everyone. And until next time, stay well. Take care.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.